In the modern era, absolute profitability is no longer the ultimate definitive metric for survival in European football. With the introduction of the new financial sustainability regulations, UEFA has officially retired the historical financial fair play model. This schematic details the three pillars of the new regulatory framework: solvency, stability, and cost control. Isolating the stability pillar reveals its core mechanism, the football earnings rule, where relevant income minus relevant expenses equals football earnings. But professional compliance under this rule is not a simple binary of operational profit versus loss. A club can theoretically post a €70 million aggregate deficit and still remain entirely compliant with UEFA regulations. This is possible through the acceptable deviation, a dynamic threshold that scales up based on strict financial health indicators and direct equity contributions from ownership. To correctly determine a club's exact acceptable deviation requires securely filtering their entire balance sheet through a rigorous 13-step algorithmic process. To see how a massive deficit survives scrutiny, we can map this 13-step process using UEFA's Example 7 simulation parameters for the 2025-26 monitoring period. Under this framework, compliance is a matter of precise mathematical modeling, not just operational outcomes. We start by setting up the working ledger. The club's raw data sits on the left, and the algorithm's procedural filters line up on the right. Phase 1 imports the raw net financial results from our Example 7 club into the three assessment periods: a €2 million loss in period T-2, a €50 million loss in T-1, and another €50 million loss in period T. Summing the deficits across the three-year monitoring period gives us the raw aggregate football earnings. The club is €72 million in the red. Phase 2 moves us to steps 3 through 5 of the algorithm to determine the club's baseline acceptable deviation cap. UEFA sets the absolute baseline acceptable deviation limit strictly at €5 million. Regulators built a mechanism that allows this €5 million cap to be legally expanded up to a maximum of €60 million. The core condition for this expansion is that the excess deficit must be 100% covered by either owner contributions during period T or by total equity at the end of period T. Extracting the equity data from the Example 7 parameters reveals that the club possesses €70 million in equity at the end of the reporting period. Because that €70 million in equity covers the €55 million expansion, the club qualifies for the full deviation limit in this phase. Even after obtaining the maximum €60 million allowance, the club is still sitting on a €72 million deficit. They remain non-compliant by €12 million. Phase 3 of the algorithm forces the data through the Article 87.03 bonus assessment. The potential reward here is quite significant. A club can expand their allowable deviation limit by an additional €10 million for each reporting period where they meet specific benchmarks. To qualify for this bonus, a club must satisfy 4 strict financial health conditions: positive equity, a quick ratio equal to or above 1, a sustainable debt ratio, and an auditor's report entirely free of going concern flags. Applying the Example 7 data against these criteria tests the club's structural financial health. In this simulation, the club fails to trigger the conditional bonus in any of the monitoring periods. The algorithm locks the final deviation cap for this phase strictly at the €60 million calculated back in Phase 2. Since the club cannot leverage Article 87.03 to raise the ceiling, they have to rely on the final phase of the algorithm to lower their recognized deficit. Otherwise, they face immediate sanctions for the remaining €12 million. Phase 4 shifts the focus entirely. Instead of trying to expand the cap, the algorithm looks for ways to actively shrink the recognized deficit. It does this by calculating relevant investments. UEFA approves specific operational expenses for deduction. These include direct expenditures on youth development, women's football activities, community projects, and infrastructure modifications. Mathematically, these expenditures act as upward adjustments. Every euro spent in these categories effectively erases a euro from the aggregate football earnings deficit. Pulling the final data point from Example 7, we calculate the total allowable relevant investments the club executed over the 3-year monitoring period. The sum is €15 million. There is a final caveat. This €15 million adjustment is only legally permissible if the club has residual equity left over after covering the baseline cap expansion from Phase 2. Cross-referencing the equity pool confirms that the initial €70 million perfectly covers both the €55 million cap expansion and this €15 million investment adjustment. We can now execute the final calculation. We subtract the €15 million in relevant investments directly from the €72 million raw deficit. The output is the club's new, officially recognized adjusted deficit for the monitoring period, €57 million. Strategic, heavily itemized spending on club infrastructure and development serves as a mathematical shield, protecting massive operational deficits from regulatory penalties. With the 13 steps complete, we bring the final outputs together for the ultimate UEFA compliance check. The algorithm compares the final adjusted deficit against the fully expanded maximum acceptable deviation. Because €57 million is safely under the €60 million threshold, the club passes the assessment. For club financial officers navigating the new regulatory environment, the strategy requires meticulous foresight. Massive deficits remain permissible, provided they are structurally counterweighted years in advance by direct equity injections and aggressively documented investments. In immediate practice, the severe 3-year aggregation rule does not apply right away, owing to the transitional provisions of Article 104. This chart outlines reporting requirements for the 2023-24 license season. Notice aggregation rules are suspended. Regulators scrutinize a single reporting period. The phasing mechanism expands to a 2-year aggregation for the 2024-2025 season before full implementation of the 3-year monitoring period in 2025-2026. Precise timing and rigid financial lock-in are critical for maintaining future compliance. Long-term survival in elite football relies on synchronizing reporting perimeters, equity timing, and localized infrastructure spending years ahead of UEFA's final submission deadlines.